Drawing images is the last step we can finally see if they appear on the screen in CodeSculptor. Let's take a look at our code. When we last left off, we had loaded some images into our screen. Now we just have to come down here and actually draw them. The command for drawing an image might be surprising. Draw image. Okay, so now there's going to be some stuff here. Before I actually do a draw image, I'm going to explain what it is that we're trying to do with a kind of a copy. And I'm still yawning, and I apologize for that. I never want to do this when I'm tired, so that I don't have to redo it later, but this might be my last one for the night. Anyway, there's going to be, five, I think, pieces, parameters of this function. So it's going to take a little bit, and each one is a little bit confusing. Except for the first one. The first one is, what is the name? I shouldn't put player here. I should put image. What is the name of the image? The name of my image is player, so I would put player there. Right? So I could put player here. The second thing is the middle point of the image. Once we go to move the image around on the screen and stuff like that, and we want to control the image, the point that the computer keeps track of like where is the image on the screen, is the middle, the center point of the image. It's kind of like a circle, except of course it doesn't have to be a circle, but it's going to keep track, like the X and Y values are the midpoint. So first we have to tell the computer the coordinates, no, not the coordinates, but the like the width divided by 2 and the height divided by 2, the midpoint of the circle, right? So I'm going to write midpoint, or center. Might be that's better. Center of image, not circle, of course, center of image. Okay, the second thing that you need to do is you need to tell the computer what the height and the width of the image are. So image width and height. And you might actually just say the word original image, because later we can scale this and say we want it to be a different size. Now, why do you have to tell it, if you say, well, here's the center of the image and here's the original, couldn't it just figure that out itself? And the answer is yes, if it was always exactly the center and always exactly the original size. The thing that gets tricky is that you can crop an image, you can take a piece of an image and say, I want to look at, a part of this image that's maybe not the center of the image, and I only want to look at a piece of it instead of the entire thing. So these numbers could change. So that's why it gets a little tricky. The next thing we want is the actual location on the screen. So location X and Y. So this is where do I put the image on the screen, right? So this is like the placement. This is something about the original image. This is something about the original image. This is about putting the image on the screen, and this last one is about putting the image on the screen, and that we would say is the scaled width and height of the image. So 5 things. The first one is just the name of the image, and then these other ones all are kind of a bunch of numbers that we have to put on the screen. So let's see how this works out. Every single thing is going to be with parentheses and a comma, because it's always going to be a width and a height, or an X and a Y, and so it's always going to be 2 items with a comma. I wouldn't normally type it out first like this, but just to show you, it's going to look like that when we're done. It's going to have all 4 of these things in it. Each one has a comma inside the parentheses. Each one is separated by the next one with another comma. And yeah, so I noticed I missed one there. Okay, so first, the center of the image. Well, the nice thing is we have the image's width and height. So to find the center of the image, you're going to take the player's width and you're going to divide it by 2. You're going to take the player's height, you're going to divide it by 2. The next grouping is pretty easy too, because it needs to be the original width and height. Well, we know that now. Player's width and player's height. You could theoretically not create this height up here, and like you could say, well, you want the width, I'll do player get width, right inside this. Right when I want to get the width, I could say it to go get the width. The thing is, you have to use this height and width so many times that it seems like it's just as easy to actually just put it in there yourself. I mean, like with a variable, because otherwise you have to type that whole other piece out every time you want to do it. Now, where do I want to put the hiker on the player that I have on the screen? And, maybe eventually you'll have a game where you say, well, go to player X and go to player Y. For right now, I'm just going to, throw my own numbers out there and just say 300, 300, just making up a number. And then the scaled width and height. So, in other words, if you want it to show up at its original size, you would say player width and player height again. So it's like we have to put this in there 3 times. The center point, the actual width and height, and then the width and height we want to show up on the screen. So it gets a little silly when you're doing the same thing over and over again, but there are reasons for it, and these give us options to make adjustments to our images. All that said, you're probably like, that's nice. Can we just get to the point where you hit the run button and we can see this image? Yay, we have an image. If yours crashed here, it may have been because it says something about the width cannot be 0. That's because the image did not load in the time that it took for you to get all this in. Once the image loads into the browser's memory, into the cache of the browser, it will load, fast every time. It's not going to have to go back and get to the website again. So once it loads, it's good. But the first time you run it, it might not have loaded all the way. You might get an error message. Let's take a quick look. Well, let's just do one quick thing. When it comes to these last 2 numbers, obviously we want to change where he shows up on the screen. We can change that number. So now he's at 600. That again is the center of the image. So if you were to say right about here at the guy's belly button is the middle of the image, this is 0.600, 300, and around it is the rest of the image, but we are tracking for where he appears on the screen by the center of the image. The second thing to look at is the scaling. You can make these numbers anything you want. So if I said, well, put it at 100, 100, this is in pixels, not percentages or anything. So in pixels, I want 100 pixels. So now he's a much smaller dude. And so you can change the size. Now, what's a little tricky about that is you can make some mistakes, right? Like, what if I said I want him 100 wide, but really tall? And then he gets all distorted. So you can distort him by accident. So here's what I do. If I want to make him smaller, this one's nice because it's 250 by 250. It's really hard to distort this. We'll get to ones later where maybe it's easier. But what I would do is I would do this. I would say, hey, I want to take this original player and I want to cut him in half. So I'm just going to divide by 2. So it's going to take it, this is half the size of it originally was. And you're like, well, that's still too big for my game. Well, I'm going to divide them by 10. And you get, there's little tiny dude. Or maybe you thought the 2 was a little bit too small. You're like, I want them a little bit bigger. Well, then just divide by a decimal point, like 1.5. And that works fine too. Now, let's just do it one more time. And this time we're going to do the background. So I'm drawing the background. I need the background's center point. I need the background's actual width and actual height. And that's why I didn't call this background underscore width, because I didn't want to type that many times. Where do I put the background on the screen? Well, here's another trick I could do. Instead of putting in a number there, I want the middle of the background to be the middle of my canvas. And so I'm just going to do that. And then finally, what's the scale of my background? Well, let's start by making him the original size. Oops. So again, we just run through it and we say the image, the center of the image, the original image's height and width and height, the location on the screen, and what size do I want them to be when I run them. And I run that, and here we go. Yeah, image dimensions must be greater than 0. This might be a loading issue. Let's just double check that I did everything correctly. Try again. Oh, see, eventually it fixes itself. Now, this was a really large image, so maybe it's finally got the width and the height, but it still doesn't actually have the image to draw them. Well, now they're gone again. Unless I'm doing something completely ridiculously wrong, but I don't think I am, so I think it's just a loading issue. And I'm not surprised by that because this image that I loaded was very large, and I would say probably I just need to change my image. If you have problems, the answer is often, hey, just change the image. To double check that that's the error, let me go back and say this is one way to fix it, is to put in that yourself. Now my dimensions cannot be 0 because I've set them myself. So now if it says the dimensions must be greater than 0, I've just made some error and you guys are looking at me like I see the error. Nope, see, it works. It's not loading the image. So again, it's probably just too big of an image. This is a ridiculously large image. Looks pretty and all. I don't think it would make a great game background anyway. And so rather than sit here and let you, watch me see if it's ever going to load, I'm just going to assume that it's not going to and stop the video here, but that's how you do it. This image also would not be the right dimensions to fit on my screen nicely, so I would end up having to scale it as well. So there's a lot of things that I'd have to do for that to get it to work right, which I was going to make you sit through and watch, but I won't bother anymore. Hopefully this helps you get some images onto your screen. If you encounter problems, usually the number one troubleshooting, change the image, try a different image, and see if it's working because of that. Alright, good luck.